In 1951, an entire American battalion disappeared during a routine night patrol near the 38th parallel. No gunfire, no distress calls, no trace. For 73 years, the families grieved heroes who died fighting communism. But on March 15, 2024, when an elderly man called the Pentagon claiming to be one of the dead soldiers, everything changed. What he revealed about that night would expose the darkest secret of the Korean War. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover the stories they buried in the mountains and make sure no soldier stays forgotten. The call came at 4:23 a.m. EST. Colonel Sarah Williams was reviewing casualty reports when her secure line lit up with a call that would change military history. The voice was elderly, shaky, but spoke with the unmistakable authority of a career soldier. "Ma'am, my name is Sergeant Michael O'Brien, serial number 37841926. I was reported killed in action March 15, 1951, near Wonju. But I didn't die fighting the Chinese. I died becoming something else." According to Army records, Sergeant O'Brien had been part of the 2nd Battalion, 23rd Infantry Regiment that vanished during Operation Killer. 242 soldiers gone without a trace. The official report blamed it on a Chinese ambush, but no bodies were ever recovered. No weapons found, just empty foxholes and abandoned equipment. But the man on the phone knew details only the real Michael O'Brien could know. His squad leader's nickname, his hometown girl's name, the scar on his left hand from shrapnel at Incheon. "Sir, that's impossible," Williams said carefully. "Sergeant O'Brien was killed 73 years ago." O'Brien's bitter laugh crackled through the secure line. That's what they wanted everyone to believe, but 73 of us survived what happened that night. We just didn't survive as Americans. March 15th, 1951. The 2nd Battalion was dug in on Hill 347, overlooking the Hongcheon River. Intelligence reports suggested Chinese forces were massing for a counterattack. At 0200 hours, Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison received orders for an immediate reconnaissance mission. "We were told to investigate unusual radio signals coming from a valley 3 clicks north," O'Brien explained during his debriefing at Fort Belvoir. The signals weren't Chinese military frequencies. They were something else entirely. The battalion moved out in complete radio silence. Standard operating procedure for deep reconnaissance. But as they approached the target coordinates, something went wrong. The air itself felt different, thicker. Men started reporting headaches, nausea, disorientation. "That's when we saw the lights," O'Brien said, his weathered hands trembling. "Not flares, not artillery. Lights that moved like they were alive, coming from underground bunkers we hadn't seen on any reconnaissance photos." The Chinese were waiting for them. But they weren't Chinese soldiers. They were scientists, technicians, men in clean uniforms who spoke perfect English and knew each American soldier's name, rank, and serial number. "They had files on all of us," O'Brien continued. "Psychological profiles, family information, our fears, our weaknesses. They knew things about us we'd never told anyone." The Americans had walked into a trap, but not the kind they'd trained for. This wasn't a military ambush. It was a research facility, hidden deep in the Korean mountains, where Chinese and Soviet scientists were conducting experiments that violated every international law of warfare. "They separated us into groups," O'Brien said. "The strong ones, the weak ones, the ones who showed leadership potential. Said we were going to help them understand the American mind." What followed was 3 years of systematic psychological experimentation, designed to break down American identity and rebuild it from scratch. Sleep deprivation, chemical treatments, sensory manipulation, and techniques that wouldn't be documented by American psychologists for another 2 decades. They called it Project New Mind, O'Brien explained. The goal was to create American soldiers who thought like Chinese soldiers, who would serve communist ideology while maintaining their original personalities. The program started with isolation. Each soldier was placed in a cell designed to break down their sense of time, place, and identity. The walls were painted to cause visual disorientation. The lighting followed no natural rhythm. Meals came at random intervals. Private First Class Tommy Rodriguez from San Antonio had been the battalion's radio man. Tommy was tough, O'Brien remembered. Grew up in poverty, joined the army to feed his family back home. He had 4 younger sisters who wrote him letters every week. The Chinese used those letters as psychological weapons, showing Rodriguez fabricated reports of his sisters' deaths while he was missing in action. Corporal James Morrison from Detroit had been the squad's medic, a gentle man who'd planned to become a doctor after the war. Morrison broke first, O'Brien said, his voice heavy with survivor's guilt. They made him watch other prisoners suffer without being allowed to help. For a medic, that was worse than any physical torture. The cells reeked of disinfectant mixed with human fear, a chemical cocktail that burned the nostrils and made breathing feel like drowning in slow motion. The constant hum of ventilation fans created a maddening white noise that made it impossible to think clearly or track time. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by random blasts of white light designed to fragment memory formation. But the psychological manipulation was more sophisticated than simple brainwashing. The scientists used each soldier's personal history against them, creating elaborate false memories and emotional associations that rewired their fundamental loyalties. They showed us letters from home, O'Brien said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Letters saying our families had disowned us, that America had abandoned us, that we were listed as deserters rather than missing in action. Some soldiers broke completely. They forgot their real names, their families, their nationality. These successful subjects were transferred to other facilities, integrated into Chinese military units as advisors and translators. Others, like O'Brien, learned to play the game. They pretended the treatments were working while secretly maintaining their American identity through hidden mental exercises and covert communication with fellow prisoners. Tommy Rodriguez from Texas would tap Morse code against the wall every night, O'Brien remembered. Just his name, rank and serial number, over and over. It was the only way we stayed connected to who we really were. But the most disturbing aspect of Project New Mind wasn't the psychological torture. It was how successful it became. By 1954, they had created over 200 American soldiers who genuinely believed they were fighting for the right side, O'Brien said. Men who spoke English, who knew American military tactics, who could infiltrate any US installation without raising suspicion. The program began falling apart in 1954 when Stalin died and new Soviet leadership questioned the expense and ethics of the project. A power struggle between Chinese and Soviet scientists created security gaps that some prisoners exploited. Rodriguez and I started planning our escape in September 1954, O'Brien said. We knew the guard rotation, the facility layout, when the supply trucks arrived, but we also knew we couldn't just run back to American lines. The escaped prisoners faced an impossible choice. They had been declared dead for 3 years. Their families had moved on. Worse, they carried classified information about Project New Mind that made them either valuable intelligence assets or security liabilities. We made it to the DMZ in November 1954, O'Brien continued. But when American sentries found us, they didn't believe our story, said we were Chinese infiltrators using stolen identities. Third rehook. The army didn't rescue us. They imprisoned us again. Rather than being welcomed as heroic survivors, O'Brien and Rodriguez were detained at a classified facility in Japan for 6 months of debriefing that looked suspiciously like the psychological techniques they'd escaped from in China. They wanted to know everything about Project New Mind, O'Brien said. Every detail, every technique, every weakness they could exploit. They weren't trying to rescue the other prisoners. They were trying to reverse engineer the program for American use. The debriefing revealed that American intelligence had known about Project New Mind from the beginning. Satellite reconnaissance had identified the facility. Radio intercepts had decoded references to American prisoners. But rather than mount a rescue operation, the Pentagon had decided the prisoners were more valuable as unwitting test subjects. They let us suffer for 3 years so they could study Chinese brainwashing techniques, O'Brien said, his voice filled with decades of suppressed rage. We were guinea pigs for both sides. In 1955, O'Brien and Rodriguez were given a choice eerily similar to the one they'd faced in China: accept new identities and remain silent about Project New Mind, or face court-martial for desertion and collaboration with the enemy. They moved us to small towns in the Midwest, O'Brien said, gave us jobs, social security numbers, marriage to women who thought we were war widows looking for fresh starts. We lived normal lives for 70 years, but we were never free. The Army's motivation for the cover-up went beyond simple embarrassment. Project New Mind had revealed vulnerabilities in American military psychology that could be exploited by future enemies. More disturbing, it had proven that American soldiers could be systematically turned against their own country. They couldn't let the world know that 200 American GIs were still out there, programmed to serve communist interests, O'Brien explained. Some of them had already infiltrated back into American society. Others were training new generations of Chinese intelligence operatives. What finally drove O'Brien to break his 70-year silence was a discovery that shook him to his core. In 2023, genealogy research revealed that several prominent Chinese-American military officers and defense contractors were descendants of Project New Mind subjects. I recognized names from the facility, O'Brien said. Men who had been successfully converted and relocated to America in the 1960s as refugees. They'd built families, careers, gained security clearances. They were in positions to influence American defense policy. Congressional investigators working with classified information O'Brien provided confirmed that at least 12 high-ranking military and intelligence officials had family connections to Project New Mind subjects. Whether these connections represented ongoing Chinese intelligence operations or simply the legacy of Cold War experimentation remained unclear. The facility in Korea hadn't been abandoned. Satellite imagery from 2024 showed recent construction activity at the coordinates O'Brien provided. Ground-penetrating radar revealed extensive underground complexes that hadn't existed in the 1950s. They're still doing it, O'Brien said during classified testimony before the House Intelligence Committee. New techniques, new subjects. The program never ended. It evolved. DNA analysis of soil samples smuggled out by South Korean intelligence operatives confirmed the presence of recent human remains. Chemical analysis identified pharmaceutical compounds consistent with advanced psychological conditioning drugs. The implications were staggering. For 70 years, while America had focused on conventional military threats, China had been perfecting the techniques pioneered in Project New Mind. The program that had broken and converted 200 American soldiers in the 1950s had become an industrial-scale operation for creating deep-cover intelligence assets. Today, Michael O'Brien lives under federal protection while congressional investigations continue. At 91 years old, he's the last known survivor of the original Project New Mind subjects willing to speak publicly. His story has forced American intelligence agencies to confront an uncomfortable reality. The Korean War never really ended. It just moved underground, into the realm of psychological warfare, where battles are fought not with bullets, but with memories, loyalties, and the fundamental question of what makes someone an American. We thought we were fighting for democracy, O'Brien said during his final public statement. Instead, we became proof that democracy could be erased from the inside out, one mind at a time. The 241 other soldiers who vanished with O'Brien that night in 1951 remain missing. Some died in the Chinese facility. Others may still be alive, living under assumed identities, their original memories buried so deep they may never remember who they really were. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of O'Brien's revelation is what it suggests about the present day. If China could systematically convert American soldiers in the 1950s using primitive psychological techniques, what might they be capable of today with advanced neuroscience, social media manipulation, and artificial intelligence? Perhaps most chilling is what O'Brien's story reveals about modern warfare and psychological manipulation. If China could systematically convert American soldiers in the 1950s using primitive techniques, what might they be capable of today with advanced neuroscience, social media algorithms, and artificial intelligence? This isn't just history, O'Brien warned during his congressional testimony. This is a preview of battles being fought right now, in your social media feeds, in your children's classrooms, in every piece of information you consume. The war for the American mind never ended. it just became invisible. The Korean War may have ended in 1953, but the battle for human consciousness continues. And we may never know how many casualties we've already suffered in a conflict most of us don't even realize we're fighting. This story waited 73 years to be told. These soldiers waited 73 years to be remembered. Share their story before it gets buried again. Because the next time automated systems decide to start a war, there might not be heroes willing to flood the missiles. Every year on March 15th, Michael O'Brien visits the Korean War Memorial in Washington, D.C. He runs his finger over the names of his fallen comrades, men who died not in combat, but in laboratory cells where their identities were systematically destroyed and rebuilt. The memorial reads, "Our nation honors her sons and daughters who answered the call to defend a country they never knew and a people they never met." O'Brien knows better. They died defending something far more precious than a country they'd never seen. They died defending the idea that some things, memory, identity, loyalty, cannot be taken by force. But Project New Mind proved that idea wrong, and somewhere in the mountains of Korea, that terrible lesson continues to be taught to new students who may never realize they're learning it. Every day we share stories of courage and sacrifice that deserve to be remembered. If these forgotten heroes inspired you, please subscribe to help us uncover the stories they buried in the mountains. Your support helps us bring these important tales to light. Like this video if it moved you, and share your thoughts in the comments below. These soldiers waited 73 years to have their voices heard. Let's make sure their stories reach everyone who needs to hear them.